do think that there was an effect from the China Tribunal ruling about organ harvesting, was that we saw for the first time media covering it, organ harvesting, in a way that they hadn't covered it for many years, if at all, because they could then point to this tribunal saying there was organ harvesting happening in China. They didn't have to, like, the media didn't feel like we have to substantiate it ourselves. We can just say these people said it was happening.
Yeah, I think that's the legitimacy point. I mean, I think it's freed up a lot, because one of the things I've been arguing against is this constant call for investigations on organ harvesting, or on the Uyghur situation to some extent. It's because it's usually framed as China must explain itself. Now it's time for China to explain itself to the world. And of course, what is the point of China lying? I mean, really, what is the point of Beijing giving us some new lies? That's what they did with organ harvesting. They said, oh, well, there's all these voluntary donations. And that was refuted by Jacob Levy and Matt Robertson, who came out with a report on the voluntary donations, showed it was a perfect parabolic curve based on an equation. The chances of getting that kind of curve are 1,000,000 to 1. Okay, maybe not 1,000,000 to 1. I don't know. Maybe it's 500,000 or 250,000. One of your viewers or listeners out there can correct me on that point. But, it's almost impossible to get a parabolic curve with natural events, okay, other than physics. That did allow us to move on to some extent, to say, well, we don't actually have to call for an international investigation where China will lie some more, and then we can all go home.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I also liked about it is with the China Tribunal, media felt like they could report on something without having to actually do their own research, which is kind of a funny commentary on the media, but also it's true, because like media don't want to do a lot of investigative journalism these days. They want to get clicks. And so, you provide this Uyghur tribunal, and then media can just point to that and say, well, here's the conclusion that they came up with. And media don't feel like they have to back it up with sending their own reporter into the field. Very few media have done that. I mean, you've got BBC a little bit, BuzzFeed, impressively, with Megha Rajagopalan, who's been on our podcast, but you don't see a whole lot of it. And so now you've got this substantive body of evidence that media can pick from and not have to actually go into Xinjiang.
Well, yes, because going into Xinjiang is a fool's errand. It doesn't prove anything. Yeah, I think going into Xinjiang and shooting dancing girls in a Uyghur camp is disgraceful. Okay, I thought that was one of those horrible things that the BBC did. And now they justified it very obviously, because if you look closely at one of the still shots, you can see that one of the guys dancing in front of you, sort of playing to the camera, has a black eye. But most viewers didn't even notice that. They just noticed, boy, Uyghur women really know how to dance, which they do. Okay, so that was mostly when they go in, it's not proving anything. The hard part, of course, is now that everything is getting shut off. Kazakhstan is out of limits now for most reporters, really. Yeah. The human rights groups have been shut down. Kazakhstan is the main repository of Uyghur witnesses.
Is it shut down because of COVID or other reasons?
Oh, well, only COVID, comrade. It's always COVID these days. That's the excuse that authoritarian states use. Now, authoritarian states have two different reactions to COVID. One is to follow New Zealand's example. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean New Zealand's an authoritarian state in any way. I take that back. I'm really sorry I said it. Jacinda Ardern or whatever is a wonderful human being and a saint. Now, but there are other countries which are dealing with it exactly the same way she is, which is proclaiming zero COVID. North Korea did that. And saying that nobody's ever lost their life to a COVID case yet. That's sort of was the case with Tajikistan for a long time, for example, which is an authoritarian state. Other authoritarian states handled it a little differently. They used it as an excuse to round up anyone they didn't like. And that's what happened in Kazakhstan. And that means every human rights group, which was defending people who'd been in the camps, and there were refugees from China who had Kazakh blood or Kazakh ethnicity in particular, those groups are all shut down. And literally every human rights group there has been fined thousands and thousands of dollars.
So what do you hope to accomplish in Turkey? The situation must be different there.
I'm just there to buy rugs. Just gonna.
Got it.
And they make this Turkish delight. It's very yummy.
You mean Greek Cyprus delight?
Is it? Is there
that's a
contention?
whole culture war
Oh
thing going on.
no! Is this like a kimchi versus pad thai thing?
It's something like that.
Well, so on a totally unrelated note to Turkey, the last time we had you on our podcast, you were telling us about your tourist trip into Kazakhstan, and that was before COVID, and so you had observed a lot of refugees there.
I was able to double the amount, which is not that impressive, but at least I doubled the amount of refugees who were speaking on the record, if not using anonymous names and so forth, but nonetheless were willing to go on the record, could record their voices.
So why do you think there's been some resistance internationally to calling it a genocide? I know you feel like that label isn't that meaningful, but...
Well, I don't know. I think that the resistance has been, I suppose my impression is the same as anybody else's, that resistance has been wearing down. It's the usual problem. Look, there are chinks in the armor here. For a long time, the problem was that the Arab states absolutely stood by China throughout this whole thing. It was clearly connected to the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's certainly true about some places like Pakistan and so forth, who really, refuses to acknowledge that anything's going on in China, on this in East Turkestan or Xinjiang. But, we are looking, United Arab Emirates is now running stories on this. That's a big change. That's a big shift. It's never happened before. Turkey, Erdogan, President Erdogan had a plan to take Uyghurs, 10,000 of them, something like that, some huge number, who he's going to send to Tajikistan for the Chinese benefit. And then presumably Tajikistan would just be a processing place for China to send them back to East Turkestan or Xinjiang. That plan was there to, in return, China was going to give them Sinovac vaccines, the Chinese vaccines, which are pretty effective.
They're slightly more than 50% effective.
Slightly more than 50% effective. Okay, that's right. And even that's not really proven. But at any rate, at that point, Turkey was in a lot of trouble. It was really seeing a big boom in cases and so forth. So they were considering doing that, and there was a kind of outcry in Turkish society, which had less to do with the caring about the Uyghurs and more to do with the fact that the economy is not doing well under Erdogan right now, and that there's a plausible opposition candidate maybe for the first time in some years. So for all those reasons, I think Erdogan shelved it. Although, as I say, you can't believe the Chinese when they say, oh, this is shelved, right? A deal's always still on the table as far as they're concerned, or at least that's the psychology of Beijing as I understand it. Now, the issue then became, well, what's going on in Tajikistan? And some of the findings that have come out this year have said, well, no, they've actually taken vast amounts of Uyghurs, about 90 or 80 to 90% of the Uyghurs who were in country, and deported them back to Xinjiang, East Turkestan. That's happened, I believe, in Kyrgyzstan as well, to some extent in Uzbekistan, and in many cases in Kazakhstan. Now, obviously, we're looking at Afghanistan. We have something like 85 families in Afghanistan. We have, or maybe 2,000 Uyghurs. And of course, the Chinese are, I'm sure you've covered this, the Chinese are cozying up temporarily to the Taliban. And I assume that that's going to be their first mission, is to take the Uyghurs back.
Yeah, it seems shocking how these predominantly Muslim countries have handled the Uyghur situation.
Yeah, they haven't handled it well. I mean, Pakistan, as I said, has been, but they haven't cracked down too deeply. I wouldn't say the world has been unresponsive. That's what I wouldn't say. I mean, there's been a fair amount of response in the Western world. And in fact, compared to Falun Gong, in many ways, there's been much more of a response. It depends how you look at it. From the Uyghur perspective, it's too late and it's been too long in coming. But that was certainly the Falun Gong perspective as well, and maybe worse. I don't even believe the world really started paying attention much to Falun Gong after the initial repression or persecution until the organ harvesting issue really hotted up, in 2006, 2007. And even then, the world loses interest again. So I think that's the long-term problem for the Uyghurs, is something similar.